Let's talk about A.J. Heschel.
Yes.
That's why we're here. But introduce my colleague here properly. Menachem Creditor is his name. He is the rabbi in New York for the Jewish Federation.
Yes.
And we know each other really by correspondence and speaking on the phone. But he studied at Jewish Theological Seminary, which is where Heschel taught.
Yes, of course.
And we know that this interview is considered very impactful. And we're going to come at it from a totally different angle. Because what we'd like to do is we'd like to paint a picture of Heschel.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to use your interview and the story behind it as a kind of backdrop, as the opener and the closer, and then we're going to drip feed other information into the article, but it's going to be framed by this very remarkable interview where Heschel.
So your end product is you're writing an article.
Yes, together we're going to create an article.
Okay. So so what we really want, I know I spoke to you on the phone, but we really wanted to get a feel from
I
you
understand.
about first of all the program, because it was a much broader program than just Professor Heschel coming in. I think there was a weekly or monthly thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, let me give you a little bit of a detail. The Eternal Light. In those days, we're in the age of deregulation. In those days, broadcasting was a much more regulated industry. To retain and keep their to get and retain their licenses, broadcasters had to meet certain commitments, percentages of their time devoted to education, religion, blah 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 blah. To meet its commitment to its affiliated stations as well as the stations it owned, NBC, like the other networks, had to devote a certain amount of time to religious broadcasting. There was actually a producer, Helen Marmer was her name, at NBC in New York when I joined NBC, that headed this unit that did one of its shows was The Eternal Light, which aired every Sunday, I think at 12 o'clock or 12:30 as I recall, and it was an iconic broadcast. It was first radio and then ultimately, of course, television. But it was a weekly show, and it did sort of plays, dramatic recreations of events in the Bible, as well as interviews with Jewish scholars,
Christian scholars, I'm sure.
I'd have to think about that.
Because if I remember correctly, JTS was involved in the creation. The Jewish Theological Seminary was involved with the creation of the radio show.
It may well have been. That is beyond my knowledge. Milton Krentz was the seminary's broadcast representative. I don't know what his official position was, but his son, of course, is very well known, but deceased. They're both deceased. But Hal Krentz was. Butterflies Are Free. Are you at all familiar with the background of that? Well, it's irrelevant, but he was a blind almost from birth. He went to Harvard and so on, became a very famous writer and so on. And Milton was his father. But Milton Krentz and Helen Marmer decided to try to get an interview with Dr. Heschel. At that point, they believed, I think, that nobody had ever interviewed him. In fact, I think ABC had. If not before, then maybe it was after. I might have the dates mixed up. But I don't want to say nobody else ever interviewed him. But it's enough to say that he generally did not give interviews, particularly not broadcast interviews. And they decided to do this. This was in 1972.
What was your role? You did it on a weekly basis, or was it a one-off?
It's a one-off. I had joined the Washington Bureau of NBC in 1967. I spent a year and a half covering as a backup correspondent, the number 2 correspondent at the White House, working with Ray Scherer. And during the Johnson administration, I was at the White House, but I was really hired to do the Supreme Court and the Justice Department. In fact, I had been working in Cleveland, and I had gone to law school there, and I had suggested to a producer friend of mine who had gone to CBS that perhaps the network could use a legal correspondent. And I went to New York, and the vice president of CBS said, "There'll never be a place for illegal reporters in television." But I had been asked to come to Washington to cover just something called the World Peace Through Law Conference, and I caught the eye of the president of NBC, and he said, "You, Washington." And so even though I was doing radio stuff at the Supreme Court in the first year and a half or so that I was here, I was basically working in the White House.
So
in 1971, that was the year I spent a lot of time on the air covering the Berrigan trial in Harrisburg, PA, for 3 months and so on. That was I don't want to go down that road. It was one of these anti-war things. And in any event, Helen and Milton decided they wanted a Jewish correspondent. There was me, there was Herb Kaplow. I think Herb probably did some Eternal Light shows. And they just called me up and asked would I come to New York and do this interview. I didn't know Rabbi Heschel. I can barely say I even knew of him. The little I knew of him, I had never read any of his works. I do not come from, I'm bar mitzvah and so on, but I don't come from a religious background. My family, my father's a Münchener. He's from Munich.
Right.
My mother was from a town which is sometimes Polish, sometimes German, up there in the Baltic region. And her family's been in the country for several hundred years. In any event, all I knew of Rabbi Heschel, I knew the name. I knew the name because in Cleveland, Arthur Lelyveld was the principal rabbi. I don't know if his name rings any bells, but he was the rabbi, the go-to rabbi in Cleveland. I believe he was Reformed. We were not members of his congregation, but I think he was Reformed. And I still can picture in my mind's eye today photographs that appeared in the Cleveland papers of Rabbi Heschel marching arm in arm with, I guess, Martin Luther King, Walter Reuther from the Auto Workers Union, and so on. It's in Selma. And the arms linked, and this fellow with this Hasidic beard and this white shock of hair and so on. And that picture still sticks. So I knew that I'd heard of Rabbi Heschel, but I never read anything. I had to do a real quick study. I think I had about a week. Helen sent me 4 or 5 of his books, including that one, which I read. I won't say I could read every word in the time that I had because I was also working for a living. But that's how I first became aware of Heschel.
So you went to New York.
So I went to New York. I had, based on his writings, I scribbled down some things. These are not quite my original notes, but sort of a compilation of my original. I don't have my original. This was broadcast from, I think, of 8H maybe, or 5H, our big studio in New York. And Rabbi Heschel, when I arrived, was in the control room. And I remember...
He'd arrived early.
He must have been, because I would have been punctual. And he was there, he was in the control room, and of course we said our hellos. And he immediately thrust into my hand what must have been, I'd say, 5 pages of onion skin typed questions. Apparently, he had kept the top copy for himself. He gave me the onion skins. I would say that it contained 100 questions.
Wow.
I didn't count them up, but my estimate would be 100 questions in 5 pages.
And how did he present them to you?
Yeah, well, he said, I was about to say, he said, here's what I would like you to ask. I said, oh, Rabbi, we don't do that.
Did you get the sense that he knew before that that's not the way it worked?
I understand your question. I don't want to assume that he did. I don't know. I took it.
My sense of him was he always pushed the envelope.
Controlling.
He was not.
No?
Yeah, he wouldn't have seen it that way.
Yes, of course. Guiding.
Guiding,
yes.
In a sense, trying to determine the agenda because
Yes.
he felt that his mission was so important. He didn't want to get distracted.
You put your finger on something. He considered it so important. I'll get back to that in a moment. Don't let me forget to raise that issue because I think that's important. So I said we don't do that. So I could see that he was at a moment of despair, and I said, "I'll tell you what. I'll give you 3
Out of 100.
I'll give you 3 questions." And he did. I remember one, and it turned out to be something that received a certain amount of attention. What is your message for young people?
Right.
Right.
That's at the very end of the interview.
The last thing
Yeah.
you asked him.
Well, because I promised him I would, and if there ever was a softball, that's it, right?
Yes.
As we say. So we sat down and ultimately to do the interview. It was I don't think he informed me. Somebody informed me that we would be taping this interview in 3 20-minute segments because Rabbi Heschel had a bad heart, and they felt that to go longer than 20 minutes at a time would be difficult for him. Although I mean, he'd be perfectly strong to me, but of course, what can you tell from the exterior? Posed great difficulties in this respect. You will recall he had a sort of a Mark Twain appearance.
Yeah.
With this, well, of course, you've seen the tape. This shock of white hair, and he was demonstrative.
Excitable.
Well, I'm being polite. Demonstrative.
He wasn't passive.
Okay. He was not passive. Flattened affect, no. And he would move his head. And, well, not every time, but many times that he did that, his yarmulke went flying off.
Right. Which is why half the interviews with the yarmulke.
Well,
the second section was not wearing a kippah.
We worried about when we joined the sections together, we would have what we call a jump cut or whatever. Yeah. So in fact, when the interview concluded, we taped a number of shots, of cover shots, 2 shots, wide shots and so on, of him putting the yarmulke on, taking the yarmulke off, and so on, to try to cover as many as we could of those disparities. The interview itself went as pretty normally as any interview does. I probably had I know I did have a couple of fumbles here and there, but
Did you have a sense that he was a great man? Or, in other words, you've interviewed hundreds of people, thousands of people, and met so many people, whatever. Over the years, you've been in courtrooms with great judges, and you've seen great people.
Presidents and kings, go ahead.
Did you have a sense that he was a great man, and that his self-importance was not exaggerated?
No. I'll tell you what I was thinking, headed toward the interview, which, again, is going to take us back in time. We're talking about 1972. In 1969, NASA had a triumph, Man on the Moon. I could tell you some stories about that too, but there was had set in to the American discussion of what our ambitions as a country should be. A bit of malaise about the space program and what it was costing. Where do we go next? What do we do next? And this may seem irrelevant, but it's what I was thinking. And in reading Heschel, I had this overwhelming sense of that it was important to him human progress, the need of humans to function as problem solvers. They needed the challenges. I remember him saying to me something like, the man who says he has no problems. He wants to have this gentle, idyllic life with no problems. And he says, that man is an idiot. He used the word idiot. We don't function that way. We're meant to be problem solvers. And it seemed to me that spoke to the space program. We've got to keep going. We got to. That keeps our muscles, our brain power working to have problems to solve. We don't want to. It's not a matter of sitting in heaven and listening to the celestial choir sing. We gotta work. We gotta work at life. Is a series of problem solving from the moment we get up in the morning until we go to bed at night. And we dream problems. And that struck me very deeply. It struck a very deep chord in me. I was not a religious person. I wasn't thinking theological dilemmas. But what struck me was this man's need to proclaim the message of work at progress. Life on earth is what counts.
Human innovation, human progress.
Well, in fact, it seems to me I had in my notes here a word that he used, human potential.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, which God was interested in.
Which is, by the way, a Kabbalistic idea.
Yes.
And it has very much in the Hasidic framework. That's where it comes from. This idea of human potential and the direction of that potential, and
And God is interested in that.
Yes. So you have these sparks which are captured, which are being, and you can release them.
The other thing that struck me was, in the more theological vein, was that how he regarded God as our partner. There was a partnership between God and man. That's amazing. God had made men free, gave them freedom, and watched with interest to see what they were doing with it. He wasn't going to intervene.
Right.
Don't expect miracles. I know he never said that. I said that. So that thought was also very much with me. This idea that what's heaven like? What's hell like? He doesn't know. He said that's not. I don't know. That's not my worry. My worry is what's going on here on earth. And this partnership, and God, when we don't do as we should, God doesn't send lightning bolts. That's me speaking, not him. But he said, pathos, all this, obviously, while he's not in human form, he does have human sensibilities, or he's given us sensibilities.
Although sensibilities are a reflection of his sensibilities.
Heschel's.
No.
Or God's.
Of God's.
Oh, okay.
So, and which is why
he's capable of having sensibilities we would recognize.
Well, other way around. Sorry for saying it this way, but if I think I'm channeling Heschel correctly to say, if we attune our souls to their own to what it is to be created, as a human, then we'll recognize God's infinite feelings. It's not that God is capable. The question is, are we?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was always struck by the fact that he had a way of turning things around.
Yes.
He was a master at turning phrases or things around.
He was a master. I can't use this in the article. He spoke in sound bites. I've never actually.
Yes.
He wrote in sound bites.
But he was blunt.
But it just came out so naturally.
Yeah.
His fourth language that he didn't speak until he was 29.
He's so natural. Everything is an aphorism. Almost every sentence in that interview.
Well, for example, I'm looking at God in search of man. And
it's the opposite.
It's the opposite of what we normally think. I remember.
Ipcha mistabra, right?
Well, not unless you read the Bible, right? What he was after, I think, was recovering the raw emotionality of the Torah. He was not to be too philosophical.
You can make that
because God in the garden says, "Where are you?
Yeah,
search." It's actually a very intuitive read of Torah.
One of my it's going to sound amateurish, but favorite quotes in life is, I think, him saying, let's see if I can get this straight. To be or not to be is not the question. The vital question is how to be and how not to be.
Yes.
Now, he seized upon and he turned it around.
One after another like that, like you said. My favorite of his is Zeus. Zeus cared for women. God cares for widows. It was like he found one after another.
But it was so natural.
Or he said, the Bible is not about God. The Bible is the Bible is not the story of God. The Bible is the story of man.
Yes, and that was in the interview too. There was a brilliant turn.
In other words, he
turns it around.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it has a built-in provocative nature.
The accusation or the kind of sneering attitude towards Heschel, which we've talked about, is that he was essentially a pop philosopher who kind of spoke in superficial sound bites, but there was no depth to it. It sounds wonderful when you hear it, but there's no depth to it. I have a sense that he was a deep person, but living in quite a superficial world, and he had to project in a way that was going to be palatable to that world. But I'm interested. I know you're not a philosopher.
Anything that stops you and says, "Hey, that's pretty good," he has provoked you into thinking about something. So I don't mean to suggest that he constructed this, but he intuitively understood that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? The way to a man's brain or heart or whatnot is you got to get him a little food first. You got to provoke him. You got to excite his interest. You've got to. You need people saying, "Hey, you know what? That's pretty." I got to tell my wife what he said.
So I'm curious about that for you because if I understood your story correctly, you were chosen because you were working with NBC and you were a Jew.
That was about the only qualifier.
And so what a strange start to the conversation, even though it's family in that way. But you weren't a religious Jew. So did his conversation with you make you stop at all? Did he have an impact on you?
Well, you were going to record this stuff.
I'm recording.
Oh, you are? Okay. I was going to say, when are we going to start the recording?
No, I've been curious about the whole thing.
Okay. I'm sorry, I broke my train of thought.
Not at all. My question was, I believe in his depth also.
Can I get you some more lemonade before?
I'll have a little bit more lemonade.
I can hear you. Go ahead and keep going.
His effect on people, he's often called a victim of his own eloquence. What he put together as phrases. So, did he make you pause? You weren't coming with a religious background per se, member of the tribe, but not identifying in a religious way. Did he make you stop?
Heschel doesn't, for some people, obviously, doesn't address your religious needs. He addresses your life needs. The things you talked about are not just religious, right? And some of his stories are. I think in the program he tells this story. He's trying to explain sadly that we don't always recognize the splendor of things. That we should be in awe of, or a word he used frequently, awe of life around us, of the wonderful, amazing things. He's very optimistic. His view. Think of all the religious characters who are preaching how terrible everything is, and the need or you're all sinners, and his is just the opposite. He's
uplifting.
And he tells this story about this fellow who gets to, perhaps you remember from the show, but gets to see his grandchild, his first grandchild, for the first time. And here is this adorable creature, and they go oohing and aahing, and here's this baby's in the crib, and this fellow who's a manufacturer or something, is seeing the child for the first time, and he's saying, amazing, unbelievable, incredible, fantastic that they could make such a crib for $29.95. Now that's got nothing to do with religion,
or everything.
But he's telling us, damn, appreciate what is truly important.
Yes.
That could be in any sitcom. That doesn't have to be in a synagogue, right?
What was the reaction to the program after it went out? You told me on the phone that you've been frequently asked about it over the years.
I would say it has tapered off, of course, over the last 50 years. But I still get, I'd say, 2 or 3 messages a year from someone who has read Heschel or seen the interview and wanted to ask me a question about it, or just to say hi. I enjoyed it. I recently got something from I guess he's a rabbi in Jerusalem, and I try to always to respond. I'm not quite answering your question.
I just want to get a sense of what the reaction was at the time.
Well, of course, at the end of each program, listeners were invited to send, I think, 50 cents or a quarter to get a transcript of the show. In fact, I don't know if you have a transcript. I'm happy to give you one. I've got lots of them. Although I honestly threw a lot out because I only have so much space. But Milton had sent me a stack of them. Well, didn't I send you that letter that Milton sent?
Yes.
I have it here if you need another copy.
I saw it. I've got it.
It said you got about 8,000 requests, more than any other show that I ever had. And in fact, it ultimately ended up being many times that, but I don't know. And NBC has long ago just discarded its religious unit. I don't know if there was a figure on how many copies were actually distributed, but certainly it's in the tens of thousands. Okay. So that was the reaction. Well, let me just pick up with a couple of things to keep us on track. What time did I say we were going to leave? 11:45?
No,
I want to give you a moment to take a bite to eat.
Thank you.
Eat. I can talk. You could eat.
Thank you.
When the thing was over, we adjourned to in Rockefeller Center. There are these 2 restaurants on either side down by the skating rink. And we adjourned to one for the lunch. And being the kind of the professor, and we were about 2/3 through our meal when he said, I have a class at 2:00. At this point, it was about 1:30, and we're eating lunch downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And he went rushing out. What I most wanted to tell you about was that, as you're aware, the show was taped for broadcast several months later. It actually aired, I think, in February. We did the taping in December of '72, around Christmas time. A Hanukkah present.
Right.
To meet Heschel.
He died very soon after.
He died in December.
What I wanted to tell you was that his widow told me, and I'll put the story in some context in a minute, she told me that the last thing he said before he went to bed, from which he never arose, was expressing his concern, his worry that he hadn't been good enough. You said, you talked earlier about a sense of importance. Not a personal importance, of his views, his
Yes.
philosophy being known. I've often thought to myself, and this is probably not PC, but I've often thought to myself how Jewish that was. That to the very end, he was still worrying. It's like the kid that comes home with a 99 on the math exam, and mom's concerned about it. So what happened to the other 1%?
Yeah.
You can never quite satisfy your parents in the Jewish tradition. At least my sense of it. As he was in his very last breaths, he was still thinking about that interview and things he should have said, and did he say this right or that right? And his widow told me.
And it only broadcast after he died.
It broadcast, I believe, in February.
Yeah, the very end of the broadcast says "in memory."
Right, that's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And I think that's. I mean, not only does it say something about Heschel, but it says something about all of us. I've never written a script that I didn't think 10 times later of things I should have said differently.
Right.
I'm always correcting my articles after the deadline.
Yeah. Well, it's in our blood.
Yeah.
We don't kiss it off.
No.
Not
when
when
I
it
say we
matters.
don't kiss it off, that's because we consider it important,
Yes.
which was your point.
Yeah.
Yes, it was important.
Everything
saw
you
this-
write is important to you.
He saw this as a window to a very wide audience, and this was his opportunity to get those things out there that, previously had been rather limited. Because he had a limited audience at the seminary, and he felt these things were so important.
Overarching, I should say to you, as far as I know, Heschel never wrote a book entitled "Where is God?" But I've often considered the issue: where did Heschel think God was?
Yes.
Everybody's got to be someplace, right?
Yeah.
And I think, although different people can draw different meanings from it, I sort of say in us. I think at one time you referred to it as a spirit. In other words, it's not a statue out there that they pray to from pagan days and so on. And in fact, I found it intriguing that he was much distressed at people running around talking about a man created in God's image. He considered that blasphemy. Now, so you could ask him, all right, so what does God look like? And he would answer, I don't know.
Right.
There's some things I don't know. I'm not capable of knowing. Which is fine. It's a perfectly acceptable answer. It wasn't his mission, if you will. It's kind of an overused word. Was life people that were living and what we're doing. As I said earlier, he wasn't concerned about heaven and hell. He didn't know whether he's going to go to heaven.
No.
Because he doesn't know
what heaven is.
Yeah.
Do you think that...
Which is the right answer.
His message resonates today, or do you think it's too time-bound to that late 60s, early 70s period when he got involved in civil rights and anti-war?
Probably less today. I don't want to be a hand-wringer, but I think for most people, and I haven't done a survey, so it's a kind of a stupid thing to say, but I get this sense that most people are just kind of exhausted. We live in a life where everything's flying around us. I mean, I can only juggle so many balls in my life. I sense a general, I wouldn't call it a malaise, it's just exhaustion. We can only handle so much stuff at a time. And so I don't think people are searching for Heschel at this stage. Those who find them are
He's
lucky.
too reflective.
Yeah, we don't really have time for navel gazing or whatever you call it. We use in broadcasting. We have a word that we use for essays that we do on the air, or we call them thumbsuckers. Those are known as thumbsuckers, or were in the broadcast business. When I used to do commentaries on something, that rather than a hard news story, that's called a thumbsucker. We don't have much time for thumbsucking.
Does that mean, well, to return to the original question then, does that mean his impact is less relevant today? Or does that mean that today's incessant pace, he says in his book, The Sabbath, that the Sabbath is an armistice with technology. And he could not have known how true that would be, given what cell phones represent. So I'm sort of, again, wondering whether or not the message that he felt was so important, and for which he was willing to be in this platform, right, prepare and even try to give you the questions to ask him, I wonder if, in a certain sense, it was prophetic. There was an awareness that we needed it more.
Well, I was going to ask you next. Was he a prophet?
Well, you asked him.
Yeah. I remember I wrote something down about the teaching of the prophets. Well, he saw it as a call to social action. We may be making, or I may be making one mistake here, which is, we talked earlier about the Supreme Court justices, and I characterized some as quite driven. It's a form of willfulness. We like to say we don't want to tell our neighbors how to live, but the fact is we do. And we have there's a certain willful nature that we have to get our message across to other people and to have them conform to our wishes. It would be a mistake, I think, at least in my recollection of him. I never had the feeling that he was driven. In other words, this idea of the prophets who are, or Ezra the priest or whatnot, with their people, or messianic.
He didn't see himself as a guru. In modern parlance, you'd call him an influencer.
Say that word again.
Influencer.
An influencer. I'm saying he was content to be an influencer. You gotta. Yes, he was content. I never had the feeling that as agitated. You used the word agitated.
Animated.
Animated is closer to it.
But it was a benign
He
animated.
wasn't hitting me over the head with it.
Right.
None of his responses were, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Right?
What did his responses feel like to you then?
Interesting. It was just interesting in his observances. And it's a more subtle messaging style. But again, coming back to your thoughts about the extent to which this was preconceived and so on, I don't think he had a plan. He had not undergone training in being a what do they have these days? They go out and do lectures, these motivational lectures.
Yeah.
He was he a motivator? Yeah, but he wasn't asking $6,000 for a speech in front of dentists on motivating them. He was just doing his bit.
Do you think he practiced the sound bites before?
Do I think he did?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Really?
He just came out with them.
Yeah, now I could be wrong, of course.
Huh. I was wondering that too.
Because they were so perfect, some of them.
I've read.
Well, he
I've
probably
studied him.
repeated things he had written earlier.
Yes.
I think he wanted to hit his greatest hits. I was listening so intently to the way he formulated his responses to your questions.
I think that's fair. And in fact, his widow said to me at one point that he knew he was near the end, and that he wanted to get it out there.
Yeah.
So I mean, he had a purpose, obviously, in doing this interview. It wasn't just, that would be a nice idea. My friends will get to see me on television. It wasn't that. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, there's no question in my mind that he saw this as his epitaph interview. If